Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this session. I hope everybody managed to get some lunch before we entered in. So can I welcome you to this session, Nourish to Flourish, Strengthening Resilient Food Systems from Community Roots to Global Governance. I think this is going to be a really exciting side event, hosted by a number of institutions. So this brings together work from Scaling Up Nutrition Movement Civil Society Network, the Western Cape Provincial Government in South Africa, CSIPM, and representatives from beyond these groups as well. Just to note, we are live casting on Zoom. We are collecting questions from the Zoom room, and we'll be bringing those a little bit later. So this session really is about how do we strengthen resilient food systems from community roots to global governance. We're thinking about community mobilization strategies, about the role of local food systems in fragmented global context, and about the impact of global economic governance on the right to food. So we're taking quite a broad stretch. We have a keynote from Michael Fakhri. We have a short intervention from academics in South Africa thinking about those academic connections. And then we will have a panel discussion with 4 panelists from a range of organizations, a range of geographical contexts, and a short time for Q&A. And then Joanne Raisin from Sun Network will be closing us out. So we are aware that we're very tight on time. We're aware that we really want to give everybody on the panel equal voice. And so I may be cutting people off if they speak a little bit too long, just to make sure that everyone does have an equal say. So in the interests of the session, I would like to invite our keynote, sorry, just as he's getting his water, to make his intervention. So Michael Fakhri is, pretty well known to all of us. He's the Special Rapporteur on the Right to Food. We're incredibly grateful to have him in this session. And he will be talking about how global economic governance impacts on local food systems, food sovereignty, nutrition outcomes, and talking to us about the challenges faced by local food systems and bringing some perspectives from civil society, government, and international bodies. So over to you, Michael.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Hello, thank you for coming. I do apologize that I will have to step out right after this. It turns out when you make very bold and strong statements that people then demand to speak to you. But that's part of the job and why I'm here. So I am going to focus on, I really appreciate today's session because it's a nice opportunity to connect a lot of the different dots in our food system. Often we focus a lot on local, sometimes we focus on global governance, and this is an opportunity to really connect the two, and I really appreciate the request for me to focus on from the international economic perspective, and I'm going to focus really about trade. And I think it's always important to be able to talk about trade when we're in Rome. So just let me focus on the trade part and then bring it into a more local perspective. So, as many of you probably know, the idea of food sovereignty and the food sovereignty movement, one reason it was created was as a push against the international economic order as we have it today. And this was in the mid-90s, early to mid-90s. And the focus of the peasant movements and labor unions, and at the time environmental activists, a lot of it was the World Trade Organization. And one of the biggest fears, which proved to be true, was that the World Trade Organization would give corporations more power and limit government's ability to govern nationally and locally, and undermine people's ability to grow their own food, to have power in their own food system. So at the heart of food sovereignty from the beginning is this push against the international economic order. And in the 90s, the WTO was treated sort of in halls of power as the ultimate answer, as of course we need to prioritize free trade, was a given. And food sovereignty was a push against that. What we see now today is a very different landscape, a very different WTO. right now, the WTO has lost a profound amount of its legitimacy and credibility. And it is in an existential crisis itself, for many reasons. But one of the longest standing debates at the WTO is the issue of agriculture. Interestingly, there is a consensus at the WTO, within the WTO, amongst all member states of the WTO, is that the WTO doesn't work when it comes to agriculture. Every government I've spoken to, and to people who work at the WTO, everyone agrees that the current agreement on agriculture is not fit for purpose for today. But then, if you ask what needs to be done, what changes need to be made, of course, then you have 16 different answers from 30 different people. I think that's an opportunity. That's an opportunity. Now, there's no consensus on what is the role of international trade when it comes to food policy. Something very interesting happened during the pandemic. First, from the perspective of how people experienced the pandemic. When governments responded, whether it was a national government, local government, city governments, what have you, very quickly, the governments that effectively responded to the pandemic and the food crisis that the pandemic triggered was they immediately focused on local production, small producers, peasants, fishers, territorial markets, local markets, regional markets, and those were the processes, mechanisms, and relationships that fed people during the pandemic. What broke were global supply chains. Why did global supply chains not work? Partly because workers got sick and workers were not adequately protected. That was a significant reason. Partly because of this just-in-time design. So the way global supply chains have been designed over the years is to be incredibly efficient, nimble, have as little products in storage as possible, and deliver goods as needed. Much like if you buy anything on Amazon today, that's more or less a version of what supply chains, how they've been developed over the years. So the priority was profit, not resiliency of these supply chains. And the other reason supply chains, quote unquote, didn't work is the shipping industry saw this as an opportunity to charge whatever price they wanted. All of a sudden, there's a huge demand. There's a shift in how goods are being delivered. And part of what led to inflation and part of what leads to inflation today is shipping companies could price at whatever they wanted. These moments of crises are often when large corporations take advantage and control prices in a way that gives them a significant amount of profits. So after coming out of the pandemic, the food crisis is now worse. The reason is all those programs that were put in place in the pandemic to feed people, many of them ended, but the root causes of hunger remain the same. Right? The pandemic didn't create a food crisis, it made existing problems worse. So the dark irony is when the pandemic ended, we're now in a worse food crisis. Cost of living remains high, there's a debt crisis, hunger continues, rates of hunger increase, rates of malnutrition increase. And countries now are trying to focus on increasing local production. They're not prioritizing trade as a matter of policy like they used to in the 90s and early 2000s. I'll add one more layer in this story. The Food Systems Summit. Food Systems Summit, when was it, 2021? It's a pandemic blur, right? The circus of mischief that was the Food Systems Summit. Interesting to me was the World Trade Organization felt that the Food Systems Summit was potentially a threat. At first I was confused, but the Food Systems Summit was organized by non-governmental organizations that were in effect pro-corporate organizations. The Food Systems Summit is an outgrowth of the World Economic Forum. It is pro-big business. It is pro-project financing, and it's capitalism on steroids is what the Food Systems Summit is and continues to be. Why would the World Trade Organization, which is another version of capitalism on steroids, pro-multinational corporation, feel threatened? Because the message of the Food Systems Summit was increase local production, focus on small and medium producers and enterprises, and it didn't have a strong position on trade. So there was an event during the Food Systems Summit that was not a Food Systems Summit event as such, but it was in the program, and it was the World Trade Organization saying, this is our turf. So there is an ambiguity within this pro-corporate sector when it comes to food policy on reconciling. They have their own contradiction of reconciling a trade policy which is about promoting trade as a priority. Increased trade because increased trade benefits everyone, and there's a lot of arguments as to why. And then this new sort of green capitalist version that is the Food Systems Summit that does focus degree using bizarre, meaningless language like boosting nature or whatever silliness they use, right? And there's this understanding like we're supposed to be on the same team, but we don't have a strong policy on how to reconcile this contradiction yet. You know who has an answer is the food sovereignty movement. There's a growing push now that food sovereignty is not just against the WTO, but if you're from a small country, I'm from Lebanon. Even before Israel attacked, even before our financial crisis, we were struggling. We can't in Lebanon produce enough food to feed everyone in Lebanon, despite having lots of water and very fertile soil. We trade. Trade is part of life. So this is an opportunity now, and I think we should have this conversation even more so in Rome, to talk about what is a trade policy that actually supports territorial markets, local production, peasants, pastoralists, fishers, poor people, that addresses inequality, and that makes room for trading on these terms. And I'm really pleased by the program, and again, I apologize I have to step out. I wish I could hear the presentation by Professors Jan and Joyce, because this is how we should start very local. Right? And by the end, you're going to hear, is UNCTAD still going to speak? Yeah. So we start super local, the engagement with communities, the relationship between scholars and communities, and then from there, we should be building towards a trade policy. Thank you very much.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Michael. It's given us a really great entry point to discuss this. And as Michael points out, you know, the terrain is shifting fast. The global politics, global economics are shifting fast. The urgency to work within food systems in new ways and to build up the next generation of scholars and practitioners and the kinds of relationships that the academy has with civil society needs to shift. So we're going to hear now from two South African academics who are going to speak to us about the work that they're doing in these local contexts. So first I'm going to invite Professor Jan Swanepoel from University of Free State to talk about his experience, and then he will hand over to Joyce Chitra from the University of KwaZulu-Natal. You have 5 minutes each. Thank you.
Thank you, Prof. Jane. So I want to start with a story. There was once a farmer who needed a farmhand on his farm to assist him with chores. After numerous advertisements, he had no successful applicants. And one day he went to an auction where he saw a young man sitting on a fence. He asked him if he needed a job, where the young man replied that he does. The farmer then asked him, what skills does he have? On which he replied, I can sleep when the wind blows. Good afternoon, distinguished delegates, fellow advocates for sustainable food systems. I'm Jan Swanepoel from the University of the Free State in South Africa, and I'm honored to contribute to this side event. The Department for Sustainable Food Systems and Development at the University of the Free State is dedicated to fostering sustainable and resilient food systems through comprehensive research, education, as well as community engagement. And this is further strengthened by the Centre for Sustainable Agriculture, a postgraduate school in the department. Our focus extends beyond agriculture production and encompasses the entire food value chain from farm to fork. We aim to address pressing challenges such as food insecurity, climate change, inefficient food production, and environmental degradation. And this is done by one, promoting sustainable agriculture practices, by developing climate-smart and agroecological approaches to enhance food production while minimizing environmental impact, to analyzing the food value chain through identification of the stresses as well as the opportunities, and supporting community-based food systems by empowering local communities to develop and manage their own food systems. And by focusing on the entire value chain, we provide a holistic approach to addressing these challenges facing our food systems. We have numerous projects, but just to mention a few, we have a crop value chain focusing on product development, processing and entrepreneurship, a wool value chain focusing on value addition and genetic improvement, and as well as small farmer commercialization. And our community projects are based on 3 core pillars. The first pillar is research and innovation for resilient food systems. So research and innovation are essential for identifying and addressing the challenges facing our food systems today. And by investing in the research, we can develop innovative technologies, agriculture practices, and policies that promote sustainability and resilience. So our key research methods are firstly to do a baseline research, analyzing socioeconomic situations, conducting situational and needs analysis, and then also action research, where we are developing and implementing practical models, frameworks, and structures that's applicable. And then we also believe that policy influence by ensuring that policies are informed by on-the-ground realities. The second pillar is education for sustainable food systems. And by empowering individuals with knowledge and skills, we can foster informed decision-making and promote sustainable practices. Our educational initiatives include a bachelor's degree in sustainable food systems, bachelor's in extension, as well as postgraduate degrees in sustainable agriculture. And we believe in cultivating new generation of food systems professionals. And the third pillar is supporting smallholder farmers and community-led initiatives. So smallholder farmers, as you know, are the backbone of many food systems, particularly in developing countries. And by supporting them and empowering local communities, we can promote food security, reduce poverty, and protect the environment. Our success is further rooted in strong partnerships with government agencies like the Western Cape Department of Agriculture represented here, NGOs, private sector, as well as other research institutions. And these collaborations enable us to leverage expertise and resources to achieve our goals. So by synergizing research, innovation, education, and farmer and community engagement, we can create more resilient, sustainable food systems that benefit all. So after the auction on his way home, the farmer told the young man to join him on his farm. They worked along well until one night a storm arose. The farmer rushed to wake the young man up, but without any success. And the farmer left him and hurried to the shed to close it. But when he got there, it was shut tight. And then he rushed to the sheep, but when he got there, all the sheep were in the kraal, safe and warm. Then he understood what it meant when the young man said, "I can sleep when the wind blows." So fellow advocates for sustainable food systems, when the winds of climate change, food insecurity, farmer challenges, and poverty are blowing, are we doing enough to be able to sleep when the wind blows? Thank you.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much. My name is Joyce Chicha. I'm from the University of KwaZulu-Natal, one of the largest provinces in South Africa and quite rural, yet increasing urban centers who are finding themselves under pressure for food security. We all agree that the food system is complex In South Africa, this complexity is quite startling in that we get to see both overnutrition and undernutrition from that food system. So what can universities do? What is their role in the food system to address these challenges? The Western Cape's Department of Agriculture's strategy on Nourish to Flourish advocates for stakeholder collaboration. As a University of KwaZulu-Natal, in its change, there is a new 10-year strategy that focuses on 5 goals. One of those goals is community engagement as one of its top 5 goals. This is quite a change for a university of higher learning that is also strong in research. Why is the University of KwaZulu-Natal doing this in a 10-year strategy focusing on community engagement? The community engagement strategy advocates for impactful and collaborative community engagement for mutual benefit. But how does a university do that? It does that through its research and teaching components, because that's why it exists. But from this strategy, it advocates for participatory research and also something quite unusual, research that starts to be interventionist in its approach. So researching, receiving feedback, and actually acting to bring change. That's not how traditionally university research is done. We see more and more of this kind of research growing at University of KwaZulu-Natal. It also advocates for transdisciplinary research. The African Center for Food Security, where I'm director, has degrees in food security. It is a transdisciplinary study by its nature. This, we believe, will lead to students, farmers, all stakeholders improving agencies for local producers, enhancing people's agency. People already have agency, they already know their problems. However, universities, when they focus in this way, we believe they can enhance people's agencies as partners in the research process. This research can also inform valuably policy and programs that can begin to be more targeted, because the research problems would have been birthed and co-conceived with local communities. In terms of teaching, which is what universities primarily do, how does a collaborative community engagement strategy impact teaching? We find that students who now go through this kind of teaching will have a different and enhanced way of being change agents themselves. It starts informing what we teach students to do in the food system, but also how do we teach them? How do they become change agents? We have to look at the way we are teaching and our pedagogy. So just to give you 2 examples of how this policy becomes real on the ground. There are 2 projects I want to share. One of them focuses on aspects of the food environment and also food safety aspects. As we turn around as a university, also the funders are coming on board. This project is funded by the Water Research Commission, and it focuses on smallholder producers, even subsistence producers in rural areas, but also in peri-urban centers. And this excites us to also see that the CFS is taking the peri-urban, urban producing food system quite seriously, because there's a report on the table now to be discussed. So we are excited to see that this is where things are going. Farmers with our research students together start identifying safety points along the food system and drivers in the food system that can improve their food to become safe and have better access to the market. We look at water contamination, microbial loads with the farmers who struggle to actually understand that microbes can be dangerous for food because they cannot see with their own eyes. Most of our farmers are quite elderly in nature. So these kind of projects help us to really actualize the strategy of engaging with communities. The next project also focuses on helping farmers
Joyce,
to
can you
access
start to wrap?
markets by aggregating their produce and teaching them how to run small agri-enterprises. And lastly, the type of student who comes out of such programs, we believe they themselves have better skills to engage with communities, but also better employment prospects and better prospects of creating jobs for themselves and others. Thank you very much.
Perfect. Thank you so much. So, I think it might have felt like quite a transition from Michael's presentation to these academics, but I think what we can see is that in this context of rapid shift, there is a real need for a new kind of academic scholar, a new kind of student, and a new kind of sets of engagements from community to academia and out. And I didn't introduce myself at the start. I'm Jane Battersby. I'm a member of IPIS Food. I was on the territorial market study. I was also the HLPE team leader for the Urban and Peri-Urban report. But in this context, I'm a South African academic. And we very much see ourselves as these intermediaries, these change makers in space. And I think there's a lot that universities in the global north can learn from the way we engage in the global south. Can I please invite our panel up? We have a panel of 4 speakers, 3 in person, 1 online, engaging around questions of advancing effective practice for resilient food systems. So Saima, Carmen, Jerry, please, when you up and join me. Fantastic. Okay, so while they're getting comfortable, let me explain. So our panelists come from a range of different geographical locations and different practices. So our first speaker, Saima Zia from Pakistan, from the Civil Society Indigenous Peoples Movement, is really going to be focusing on civil society's role in advocating for food sovereignty and how grassroots movements influence policy and drive nutrition security. So I'll introduce each speaker as we go, but Saima, over to you. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you, Jen. Thank you so much. I'm here representing not only civil society and indigenous people mechanism, as well I'm representing Lave Kampansina here. And as Michael Fakhri talked about the trade and trade agreements today, and I think we should listen to the perspective from the farmer, like how these trade agreements are affecting the farmers. So I will start my presentation with a message from the farmers. Like, for several decades, you have left us on the mercy of the markets. Why are we in debt? If the market economy were so efficient, why we are not getting fair price for our products? Why are corporations making profit while we suffer? So this is the message from the farmers, like how these trade agreements are affecting us. And as yesterday, Michael Fakhri said in the plenary that we have their right to food guidelines, we have their everything with the FAO, we can ask them. But what we think as an organization that it should be revised. There are 20 years have been passed. 2 decades, so much has changed, and especially after the pandemic, so many things has been changed. So there should be revision. It should be 2 decades, too much long time. So I will talk about now, like what the impacts of these trade agreements we are having on the farmers, and then what we want actually. I will try to be very brief. Time is very short. I cannot maybe cover all the things. Like what is the effect of these trade agreements are corporate concentration on the food production, climate crisis because of the monocropping and industrial livestock, commodity trade and loss of biodiversity. We lost biodiversity in our crops, rising cost, and plus falling the price of the farmers' products. And what is the result? That all rural and farmer, they are in debt. And also dismantling of market regulations and price support. vulnerability of the distribution of the shocks like pandemic, war, whenever this is happening, the small scale producers, they are at the risk. They are always like been suffering. There is no safety measures for them. Exploitation of the food chain workers and migrant workers in this whole process. I don't need to explain because I don't have time. So dispute settlement, encouraging national sovereignty, food as a weapon, and growing hunger is the result of these free trade agreements. So the fight against hunger and free trade, in particular against the WTO, has been an essential access of the union between farmer organizations around the world. And what we are seeking for right now, the alternates are like through 30 years of experience, struggle, and alternate actions, Slave Campesina decided to work on a new international trade framework based on the food sovereignty. And what we want in this alternate framework, defend the right of the countries to determine their own agriculture and food policies, including food stocks, market regulations, price support, etc. International trade must be based on the highest standard of the human rights. FAO, CFS, IFAD must help countries to build national policies for the food sovereignty. Land, water, seeds, and territories are not commodities. They should not be treated as a commodity. They should be treated as a basic rights. No country may be excluded against its will from international trade. Food never be used as a weapon of war or geographical concentrate. International food aid is never to be used for market access. Public observatory on production, cost, and selling price for agriculture products and inputs prohibit dumping and export subsidies for the agriculture and food products. Agriculture trade at the regional level must be promoted country to country. Contracts at prices agreed on the advance and by the countries involved to subsidize agriculture trade. The currencies used to trade agriculture and food products must not become the tool of geopolitical domination. So we want systematic change now or never. So at the end, what we want, like as an organization, LVC, we are calling all our members, allied social movements, civil society organizations, and friends in academia and policy spaces, including those who are in the governments as well, to join us in the effort to building the framework that can help build a fair system of trade rooted in the principles of food sovereignty and social justice. Thank you so much. Hope I'm not long.
Thank you, Saima. I think what we heard there is a really clear articulation of what some of the challenges are, but then the kind of critical response that comes from working in solidarity at the grassroots level, and a call to action and shared action. So thank you very much. I'd like to move along to Carmen Letle-Jorge from Namibia. She's a nutritionist at the Nutrition and Food Security Alliance of Namibia, and she's going to talk us through a few cases of what they're actually doing on the ground in Windhoek. So over to you, Carmen. Thank you.
Thank you, Jane. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Like Jane introduced me, I'm Carmen Letle-Jorge, a nutritionist at the Nutrition and Food Security Alliance of Namibia. Today, I will mainly focus on sharing the success stories of our unique and interactive nutrition training approach that we have developed to address the pressing issue of malnutrition in Namibia. As you may know, Namibia, like many other countries, is facing the triple burden of malnutrition, which is undernutrition, overnutrition, and micronutrient deficiencies. To tackle this complex challenge, NAFSAN has taken a comprehensive and participatory approach that brings together various health, nutrition, and food systems aspects. Our Nutrition for Health manual involves a series of sessions with built-in exercises to explore, self-reflect, and to discuss the next steps. It focuses on 4 key areas. Number 1 being malnutrition, both under and over. Number 2 being food groups and healthy eating, learning about the importance of a balanced diet. Number 3, the right start for our children, focusing on the first 1,000 days, breastfeeding, complementary feeding, and child development. And then lastly, the 4th one is food systems and cycles, exploring food production, food safety, food preparation, and food preservation. And this entire manual aligns with the global recommendations and standards of WHO and UNICEF. Now, our main goal with this Nutrition for Health manual is to empower Namibians at all levels of society to make more informed and healthier food choices for themselves and for their children. And to date, we've trained 500 facilitators on this Nutrition for Health manual through mixed funding via different projects, initiatives, and partnerships, including local private sector. One of the key strengths of our approach is its focus on community empowerment. We believe that local communities are best positioned to identify and address their own needs. By providing them with the necessary knowledge, skills, and understanding, to make the connection between the food they grow, the food they buy, the food they eat, and their children's health. We empower them to take ownership of their own nutrition and food security. Not only that, the Nutrition for Health also supports government resilience in 3 ways. Number 1 being community feedback and policy influence. The Nutrition for Health trainings has been able to gather valuable feedback from communities on nutrition-related issues. This feedback has been used to inform government policy makers about the challenges that are happening on the ground level. And then secondly, capacity building for community health workers, both government community health workers and civil society. We empowered frontline workers to be able to address nutrition-related issues at community level. The training also brought together government and civil society community health workers, fostering collaboration. And then lastly, we've trained government officials on this Nutrition for Health manual, and it has empowered them with the knowledge, skills, not only to be able to identify how malnutrition presents, but also to help implement effective nutrition programs. In conclusion, we are seeing how community-led and inspired initiatives are more sustainable and serve as models for other countries facing the similar challenges. Civil societies are not just grassroots implementers and advocates that hold governments accountable. Civil societies are, in many cases, highly effective and reliable partners to government policy development, implementation, and much-needed coordination. Thank you.
Thank you, Carmen. I think it's always great to hear these examples from the ground where there's real grounded project work happening. And I think what Carmen's been describing really speaks to the kind of importance of the addition of agency as one of the pillars of food security, right? And so I think there's this kind of recognition of what communities themselves can do, what they can learn from other entities, but also the really vital role in communities and subnational government in particular, making connections and learning from each other. So I think it's a really sort of substantive and generous example. I'm going to hand over to Jerry Aris now, and Jerry is the Acting Chief Director of Agricultural Producer Support and Development at the Western Cape Provincial Department of Agriculture down in South Africa. And Jerry's going to be speaking about strengthening local food systems through community mobilization and learning journeys. So over to you, Jerry.
Thank you, Prof, and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. As being said, my name is Jerry Aris. I'm representing the Western Cape Department, Western Cape Government, and I'm working for the Western Cape Department of Agriculture. Now, I haven't been talked about the Western Cape Government. The Western Cape Government is a data-led government underpinned by scientific research. Then the Western Cape Government has 3 strategic objectives, named jobs and obviously well-being and safety. Now, our vision is that each and everyone should have at least one permanent job in-house. Then well-being is critical for our citizens in the province, because all indications are if we don't address that, it will put pressure on the rest of the programs within government, and that will come at a cost. And then safety, each and everyone has the right to a crime-free environment. So those are the things that is very important. Therefore, caring, that one of our core values, and well-being of our citizens is of utmost importance for the Western Cape government. Chairperson, ladies and gentlemen, we know and we heard a lot about the impact of COVID-19 on our food systems, and it also happened in our province. And we learned a lot of lessons, especially due to dysfunctional and ineffective food value chains and systems. And the information that we gathered through this COVID-19 pandemic was the foundation for our Nourish to Flourish strategy. Now, this strategy is a Western Cape strategy, and it was there to combat food insecurity, Out of this Nourish to Flourish strategy, then we started embarking on learning journeys. I think that is a very important part of our strategy, where we're not going to communities and just drive by or just think what I think is the solution for their problems, but we really went in as multidisciplinary teams into the communities. And for the first time going there, the instruction was, you don't tell the communities. You are going there to listen to the communities, listen to what they experience on a daily basis and what are they doing with the limited resources that they have. There was even, you were not allowed to take in more money than the average amount of funding or money spent by those communities per day. That on its own led to a serious diet process for our officials, because they couldn't make it with $1 or half a dollar per day. The purpose was then to look at, to determine the strengths, weaknesses, and opportunities of the food system at the community level. Furthermore, to upscale local food systems initiative to enhance food security through policy and intergovernmental collaboration. Now that is critical for us in the Western Cape. The data that we gathered through this learning journeys, we could now use to identify hotspots within communities and people with serious food insecurity challenges and people that were at risk, especially children under the age of 5. Now, having said that about the Western Cape, however, the Western Cape exports up to 54% of all agricultural produce in the province. However, the latest National Food and Nutrition Security Survey done by the Human Science Research Council indicated that 18% of the Western Cape province suffers from severe food inaccessibility. So although we are exporting a lot of food, there's still a lot of people in our communities that goes to bed hungry in the evening. Furthermore, this report highlighted that there's an increase in malnutrition, stunting, and obesity. But the surprise was, Chairperson, ladies and gentlemen, is the severe prevalent increase in stunting in at least 3 of our 6 provinces in the Western Cape. Therefore, Chairperson, ladies and gentlemen, our vision is to have one home, one garden in the province. We are busy implementing on a yearly basis thousands of household gardens at houses. However, I think the most important thing and intervention that we can do is to expose our kids at school to produce their own food. Therefore, we are embarking on school gardens where kids can learn and see how to produce their own food, because before COVID-19, people were thinking that foods are coming from the shelves of shops, but it's actually been produced by our farmers. Furthermore, we will give them, our communities, the necessary skills and training to produce their own food. We will continue with our partnerships, as alluded earlier. Chairperson, that is the strength of our province. We will continue with partnerships with national department, provincial departments, local government, NGOs, civil society, universities. They are all part of our partner with us. The support to vulnerable groups, we will identify within these hotspot areas, especially for youth, people with disabilities and women, and we will support them with our food security initiatives. We will continue with the learning journeys. That is critical to our strategy, where we can learn and listen to communities. Chairperson, ladies and gentlemen, we have just done our annual World Food Day on the 11th of October, which is very critical and important for the FAO, and we assume all of our interventions contribute to the SDGs of the United Nations. On that note, I thank you.
Thank you, Jerry. So I am from the Western Cape, so I do have a little bit of a bias towards the work of our government, but I think, you know, there's something in, again, what Jerry is saying about being a data-led government, but then also making sure that you're not just depending on the numbers. And this important act of the vulnerability of the state going into the communities, to disavow yourself of what you think you know about the spaces, to really learn, take those multidisciplinary teams out, and then not to walk away and immediately forget what you've seen. And so hearing how those learning journeys have created a new understanding of this from the state of what the challenges are, but also a recognition of the new opportunity spaces. So I think that's incredibly helpful. We now have an online intervention from Anastasia, and I'm going to apologize in advance for my mispronunciation of her name, Nesvatilova, who's the Director of Macroeconomic and Development Policies at UNCTAD. So switching us back out from that very local scale, provincial scale, and now back into international trade, which is where Michael started us in the first place. So Anastasia, I hope you are ready and online.
I am indeed. Thank you very much, Jane, for this introduction. I don't know if you can see or hear me. And I have an additional challenge of having to share my presentation with you now as I'm a co-host. And what do? I do share. And I go into PowerPoint. I guess it so far didn't work. Let's try again. I'm really sorry. It's been a while since I used Zoom. Yes, okay. And can you?
Yep, we can see them now. Thank you.
Wonderful. And if I flip through slides myself, would they flip, or do I need to go into the
Yep, we can see them
presentation
changing.
mode in my own PowerPoint?
Yep, you're good.
Okay, so. Okay, is it okay? Can you see the graph with the colored bars of profits of main traders at the moment?
No, I think if you can go back to how it was before, that probably is going to work. Sorry.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we can see them again now.
Wonderful. It's just that I need to see them myself to talk and to understand how the flip through really say. So it's very, very silly. Yes, okay. Okay, so can anybody help me with the next slide? What technically do I need to do? Okay, wonderful. Somebody's doing that. Okay, so thank you very much. It's incredibly encouraging to have these diverse voices in this panel, and I in particular want to refer to a concept used by Michael when he opened the session, and he used the idea of food sovereignty. What I want to talk about today is the effective corporate sovereignty of a very complex and increasingly complex food system globally. So we all know that it's highly monopolized, very complex, and also very financialized. What we do not know is precisely what the companies that control the financial and technology and agricultural market are doing inside their corporate structures. At the moment, although there is quite a little bit of attention to their role in food prices, in speculation, and even contribution to inflation, especially in developing countries, the debate on food security so far hasn't touched on the corporate power, on the dimensions of corporate power and increasing risks of corporate power. And yet, my call today would be to say that it increasingly is in the public interest and in the interest of food security to do that, partly because the price volatility, profiteering that you see partly captured in this graph, are very likely to return to the agenda of global economy and global decision makers in the near future. So here you see capture of profits of main food and energy traders in the very volatile years of 2021, 2022. These were the heyday of super profits, recent super profits in oil and energy and food. And if you just compare the types of bar charts above across food traders and energy traders, you will see that the dynamics are very similar, that just as energy giants profited on oil price volatility and oil price crisis, food giants profited handsomely on the food price spike in 2021, 2022. The prices for food have receded. Next slide, please. The prices for food have receded a little bit this year, but they still remain on average 20% higher than their pre-pandemic levels. What I'm going to say to you in my final slide is that with the current projection of enormous growth in food demand globally by 2050, we're going to see more price spikes aggravated by various risks, conflict, and climate change. So the power of the corporations that control this market is enormous. At the moment, governments are not doing much to address it. And the WTO system, just as Michael presented to you in the morning, seems to be completely outside or on the margins of this governance debate. It regulates and demands a lot of compliance from the states, from sovereign states, but it doesn't demand anything from the few corporations that control the food system. I put on the slide the ABCD, the 4 companies that control, but we do know that the food system is controlled by more companies than that. However, if you count all of them into an aggregated system, you still get to either 11 or 13 corporations that control global food trading. And this is not just food trading, this is trading of things that go into the production of food, things that help control the production of food, the fertilizers, technology, intellectual property rights, sometimes shipping, transport, and of course the financial trade and funding mechanisms that are necessary to make the system work. On the left-hand side, you see a correlation between price volatility and profits of the 4 giants, but more interesting and less discussed for you is the graph on the right. The lines show types of profits through time that the global food sector in aggregate, so these are not individual corporations, but food sector in aggregate, has registered during different times, and in particular during times of volatility of 2020, 2022. The red line in particular is indicating profit before tax. This is in distinction to operating revenues, for example, that are revenues from core business of these corporate activities, from core business of, for example, food trading. Profit before tax is profits from all the activities these corporations have been doing. In particular, they have been actively and increasingly engaged in financial investments and financial trade. And as you can see, those investments and those activities have been particularly lucrative. They were not taxed, most of them were not noticed, and that yet they remain a source of unearned effectively profits. They undermine domestic revenue mobilization by states that aim to enhance their economies, in particular in developing countries that export food and are the primary source for food. and they so far remain unaddressed. Next slide, please. So we have done a little bit of an analysis of generally very scarce information on financial speculation, because partly the data is so scarce and it's not aggregated and it's not collected. But we did study the BIS over-the-counter information on OTC derivatives that does include agricultural derivatives. If you can zoom in a little bit on the actual charts now, you will see two lines on the panel on the left, the orange and the blue. The first huge spike of financial speculation in commodity trading, and this includes food, comes, if you can see very carefully the dates, this is the 2008-2009 food and commodity price spike. As you can see, this spike in curves is fatter and larger than the spike in 2021-2022. You can also see that the distinction between the two lines is much closer. So the orange line is very close to the blue line. What does it mean? It means that the amount of bets taken, most of them were actually successful. They were done by professional financial speculators. This is the time of the first wave of financialization of food trading. This is where banks and other financial institutions were actively engaged in financial system, buying, selling, and speculating on financial derivatives on food and commodities generally. This was the heyday of financial speculation, and this was also the time when the Financial Stability Board did ask, should we now regulate commodity trading as a systemically significant financial activity? At the time, they decided that they don't have enough data and information to confirm that. They decided not to regulate. In parallel, what happened as huge post-2008 financial regulations were put in place, the non-financial participants in this financial market, the food traders, the commodity traders, lobbied heavily to be not classified as financial institutions. Of course, they're not. They're industrial and manufacturing companies. They trade food and food-related items. So what happened is that professional financial institutions left the market, but the incumbent traders of financial assets related to food have stayed. And that's why the spike between the orange and blue, the most recent spike in speculation, is so much shorter than the previous spike. There are bets being taken in the financial market, but you can see that not all of them are so professionally successful. These are not banks, these are not asset managers, these are not hedge funds. These are food trading corporations that are engaging in financial activity. This financial activity is not licensed, it's not regulated, it's not taxed. Most of it comes from regulatory and legal exemptions that were granted in the plethora of reforms that came into the financial system in 2012. Next slide, please. Okay. If you want to know who they are, the big food commodity traders, we know the ABCD, Archer Daniel Midlands, Bunge, Cargill, and I forgot the fourth one. But really, corporations consist of thousands, hundreds and thousands of entities that comprise the corporate shell. Only 1.5 of the ABCD giants is actually a publicly traded corporations, i.e. it's obliged to publish reports that are open to the public, the regulators, civil society, and economists. Many other are simply private corporations. We barely know what they do. They have no obligation to disclose their stocks, and they have no obligation to disclose their investment activities, their what is it called? The projections for agricultural market and their stockpiles. And yet, if you wanted to regulate the market, it's not that simple, because the table on the right presents to you just exactly how many of Glencore's, Archer Daniel Midlands, and Cargill's are out there. So if you go for Cargill or for COFCO or for Archer Daniel Midlands, you will see that it consists of 825 little Archer Daniel Midlandses that are all individual corporations. They're all individually based in there are different jurisdictions, and they each do a variety of very different activities. Sometimes they're connected to each other, sometimes they're not connected to each other. But the political task of regulating or even getting the data out of this umbrella or network of corporate cells is a task in itself. And I would suggest that this should be a priority for any regulatory debate on food governance, because being reactive and being only led by food security concerns that are by nature crisis driven doesn't generate long-term longevity and sustainability. Next slide, please. On this slide, we simply, just if you hone on into the chart itself, we simply decided to see which companies, how have they evolved historically in terms of their financial exposure and investment. And without anticipating this result, we have found out that it's the big giants, the big 4 or 5 corporations that through the years of financial volatility in the food market, in commodities market, have become de facto shadow banks. This expansion has been through their subsidiary activities that are not monitored, that are not regulated, for which data is scarce and very difficult to obtain. It's very expensive data. At the same time, I have to say the sector is very diverse, and there are indeed corporations that are what they are, what they say they are on the label. They're food traders, they're grain traders, or they ship food. I very much hope that my next slide is there on your presentation, but no, it's not. So it's actually, we're sharing something else. We can stop now and I will read through what I prepared for myself. So the policy takeaway for going into the uncertain years that lie ahead us is that on the one hand, we know that prices have receded from their 2021, 2022 peaks, but I would say that it shouldn't lead into complacency into terms of systemic regulation of food systems, because data ownership and control, precision technologies and finance are the next tools of corporate sovereignty over food systems and over communities that actually generate and produce this food. So in the report that we're launching next week, we say that digitalization, artificial intelligence, and bioinformatics further accelerate the concentration of corporate control over, for example, plant genome data in the hands of those few multinationals who already control the system. So the financial and technological changes that are happening are going to further consolidate their power over food systems. Usually research, and we know that from data that we
Anastasia, can I ask you to wrap up, please?
It's the last slide. Advanced country owners of intellectual property, of course, capture most value. One example comes from Brazil. The country invested heavily in engineering of soybeans very suitable for local soil. They actually created a whole infrastructure of the whole food systems that should capture most of the value. And yet this particular top agricultural exporter is managing to capture only 36% of soy profits and relies heavily on foreign equipment and seeds. So when we talk about food security, is that it's very clear that corporate sovereignty over food systems is really not in the public interest. Governments needs to be much more proactive in food trading regulation, but not reactive in times of food insecurity. That's simply not enough. And just one final piece of information. Global food demand will increase by more than 50%, or is projected to increase by more than 50% by 2050. With climate and other risks in the horizon, we will see more price spikes, more market volatility, and therefore more profiteering and food insecurity. So the current system of trading and food production needs to be enhanced by financial scrutiny and financial regulation. That would be our suggestion. I'm done. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Anastasia. Will you stay online for the Q&A session?
How long would it last?
Thank you. So folks, we have a few minutes for questions and answer session. Please can I ask for questions from the floor and that they are genuinely questions rather than making statements. I think that would be productive. So can I just see any questions from the room and then CSIPM if they give us a chance. I'm going to recognize you.
Thank you. My name is Mary from Kenya, from the Right to Food Coalition. I appreciate what we've done here, looking at this collaboration from academia, civil society, and governments. I know it's not, they're never easy, some of these collaborations. But my question goes to the representative from the Western Cape government, Jerry. How easy or how hard was it to bring multidisciplinary teams to collect issues in the community? Because like speaking for Kenya, food-related issues are mainly the space of agriculture, and sometimes health comes in for nutrition, and then there's social safety nets. But I just wanted to hear your experience. How are you able to communicate this to the multidisciplinary teams to address food systems related issues?
We only have space for maybe one question, I'm afraid. So you fight amongst yourselves.
Thank you. My name is Lungi Sauna. I come from South Africa. I live in the Western Cape, and I work in the region representing the Rural Women Assembly, which is a movement of persons of women who are smallholders. My question to Jerry from the Western Cape as a citizen of Cape Town. My question is, we are facing austerity budget cuts, and this program of Nourish and Flourish, how does it relate in schools in particular when it comes to nutrition? Whether there is any school feeding schemes that are happening at schools. I heard you spoke about gardens at schools, etc. But also I work in rural areas. I don't know how does that relate and translate in rural areas. That's the first question. Second question is on the food, the right to food, nutrition is related to the question of land. In order to produce food and to combat nutrition, malnutrition, etc., we need access to land. How is the Department of Agriculture in the Western Cape dealing with the question of land, especially in supporting poor peasant farmers? Thank you.
We are, as all the side events, very, very tight on time. So, Jerry, perhaps you can give a extremely brief answer, and then I think the panelists, we will all be going to plenary afterwards, but I think everyone is open to conversation after. So quick answer.
Yes, thank you very much. I will just respond quickly to the first question. Partnerships is not new to our province. We started with partnerships down in 2006, but that was related to land reform from the National Department. They said that we must work with commodity partners to get the success of land reform higher than where it was at that stage. Since then, since 2009, we had signed partnerships with a lot of commodity partners, but since then also the Premier, the current Premier and the Premier before them was driving, but let's talk about the current Premier. He was driving the process after COVID-19 and also what happened with the value chains. And because the Premier is driving, all other departments must buy up until the local level. So in our case, it's very easy. We have a footprint in the whole province, and it's very easy to work with municipalities. And municipalities at this stage see us as a critical partner in solving the food insecurity issues within communities with our limited resources. But we have MOUs, Memorandum of Understandings, with all the institutions, of most of them. And on a daily basis, I over-exaggerate now, people are coming to us to say if they can sign a Memorandum of Understanding. Can I respond to the second one as well quickly? Yes, that's a challenge, but we're trying with our limited budget to support schools across the province and start with gardens there in collaboration with the education department. The land issue is a critical issue. That's our biggest problem in the Western Cape. And we can only at this stage work with the National Department of Agriculture, Land Reform and Rural Development to access land, or through municipalities, or we assist people to see where they can lease land. But in the Western Cape, those land is actually linked to the availability of water and the quality of water. Thank you, Chair.
We do need to go to our final speaker who's going to help us wrap up the session. So I think if you have conversations that you want to have, please do come and talk to the panelists. I'm going to hand over to Joanne Raisin to finish us off, who's the Director of Scaling Up Nutrition Movement, and she's going to summarize and close us out. No pressure.
Yeah, thanks very much. I've got to say this has probably been my favourite panel discussion this week, but probably the most difficult to wrap up given the diversity today, but I'll give it a go. So thank you to the Special Rapporteur for the right to food, for opening the session, and to all the panelists and everyone who's attended today, and for the insights and contributions. This is a really important discussion, and it's a really important time when 42% of the world's population cannot access a healthy diet, and the problem's growing. So it really makes positive stories that we've heard today really important, and it also helps us understand that change is possible. And we need more of those stories as we go along, so need to keep sharing these. So I hope this week has been a means that these can be, catalyzed. So in trying to pull it together, what I think I've heard today is the importance of connectedness of local actions and global governance. And in terms of those two things working together to strengthen the resilience of national food systems, or not working together and undermining national food systems. And I think Michael showed us really starkly how structures and shocks at the global level can break the global food supply chain, and just what impact that has had on the poorest. And I think as well, it was interesting to get the example from Western Cape with the contradiction between increasing exports of food at the same time that there is an increase in stunting. So again, that interconnected story. And I think the second most important thing that's come out of today is the value of local collaboration. Every single example spoke of the need for wider stakeholder engagement and community engagement in fostering food systems that support safe and resilient food and nutrition security. And I thought the example from Pakistan was great. It was almost like giving us a story that we could give to the international system of what needs protecting at the national level to promote national food security. So again, that big story about interconnectedness. And maybe just a bit of a plug from our side, because that's why I'm here as the Director of Scaling Up Nutrition Movement. And for those of you that don't know SUN, SUN is an alliance of 66 member countries, supported by a secretariat and an assistant secretary general, who is the highest point in the UN for nutrition, and supported by 4 networks of civil society, private sector, donor governments, and the UN. And these all come together at different levels, at the global level and at the national level, to push better nutrition. And I think SUN has a really important role to play in building that connectedness that we've talked about today between local action and global advocacy and global policy. And I think just wrapping up, because I know coming out of time and Jane's looking at me, I just think it's really important to keep Sun and the movement connected with the stories and the people here today, because the role that we have is to amplify these voices and make it count in the global system so that we are building a fairer and fairer system for improved nutrition. I think just lastly, as part of that, the role of civil society comes up time and time again, and I think it's going to be really important that we become a lot more serious about investing in national civil society and investing in national civil society capacity to be able to actually compete in the global economy and push for greater accountability. So I think that's it from me. Thank you very much.
I should just say thank you to everybody for being here. I know not everybody got their voice heard, but I think your presence is noted and the opportunities still remain for ongoing conversations. Thank you.